Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Elden Ring Nightreign and specifically the Unlocked the FPS mod that's available on Nexus Mods using the RX 9070 XT. You can see the specs for our 9070 XT over here in GPU-Z. It has 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 video memory, and we are using the ASRock Steel Legend version of the card, playing on the latest AMD drivers and pairing with a 9800X3D as well as 64 gigabytes of DDR5. Now we'll go through these initial tests first. I do want to test the card without using the mod just to see what we get, although I'm pretty confident we're going to be getting our max 60 FPS engine lock that we are aiming for here. But starting off 1080p at max settings here, and I'm playing on borderless windowed just because that is the mode that you do need to be on when we do move over to that mod. So I'm just playing on there just to actually get it, somewhat of a feel for the type of performance that we're going to be getting. Now you can see loading in here at 1080p, and the card is handling the game just fine. Of course, 1080p. It's a 60 FPS lock before we do go in and implement that mod, and we are getting right at that 60 FPS mark with really no issue whatsoever. Our GPU utilization is a bit higher than I maybe would have expected otherwise, but pulling around 120 watts or so, somewhere in that area, getting a real stable 60 FPS with 1% lows down at 55. And at 1080p at least, only using about 6 or a little bit closer to 7 gigabytes of our video memory. So not that it really should be a surprise to anyone who is familiar with the performance of this game and of this card, but we are maxing out 1080p without really any issues whatsoever. It's about as stable of an experience as you can get on this particular title. And now bumping up to 1440p and keeping our same max settings here. And not that it should be much of a surprise, but 1440p as well, at least to begin with, and I'm sure will be the case. I mean, even like a 3060 can run this game at 4K and get pretty close to 60 FPS, so 9070 XT is a very, very powerful GPU, so it shouldn't be any major surprise that we are still getting pretty much the same performance here. It's pulling just about the same wattage, maybe just a touch more. It's about the same, not really too different as far as our GPU utilization goes. Our 1% lows did take a mild tick down, being in the 55 range and now being at around 50. The experience itself feels largely the same. There's no really super major difference that I can really tell right off the bat, but the resolution, obviously, the increase in resolution does look much nicer. Our video memory still sitting right about 7 gigabytes, not a huge difference as far as our video memory goes. So while this is not a very demanding title, and as you can see, a little more gameplay here, and our 1% lows are picking up just about to where they were before. It's not a very demanding game, but it is a really pretty looking game, and certainly I imagine once we inject our mod and set that up, we're going to be getting a really, really nice experience. You can see even with like effects, there's minor stutters, things like that, not indicative of really the GPU having any sort of issue, more just a game engine problem, but here at 1440p, no issue whatsoever, able to hold on to that 60 FPS and have a ton of headroom left over. And now bumping up to 4K, which is the highest resolution that I'm going to be testing today, and sticking with those max settings. For this one, I'm just going to turn off motion blur. I forgot to do that on the other settings, but that's more of a preference, shouldn't really affect our performance in any sort of meaningful way. And dropping in here at 4K resolution, you can see we're still getting pretty much the same performance. We are pulling more wattage now. That's definitely true. At these higher resolutions, game looks incredible. I mean, it's just one of the best looking games that is the easiest to run. But maybe, that's could be subjective. I know I'm a huge fan of Elden Ring's art style. Maybe not be the case for everyone, but you can see at 4K resolution, no issue whatsoever. The game is definitely, able to handle this, or the GPU is able to handle this game at this resolution without really any problem whatsoever. Super consistent experience, super smooth experience. We are starting to pull quite a bit more watts. As you can see, we're now in like the 300 range, so certainly more than we were before bumping our resolution. But the AMD cards, if there's one complaint I have about the 9070 XT, aside from the fact that they're hard to get at MSRP, they're just not super power efficient cards. They tend to use quite a bit of power to actually get their performance, but depending on your situation, for most people I'd imagine it's not a huge concern. But as you can see, 1% lows right around 54, 55. It's like one off where we were before, so essentially same performance, and you can see with our GPU utilization fluctuating between like 50%, sometimes 100, back down to 50. It's not at all constrained by our GPU. There are other factors in place that are constraining and constrain the performance, and of course that is just the actual way that the game is built, being that there is a 60 FPS engine lock. So pretty much essentially perfect performance from what we could expect here at 4K. Now, you probably knew that, so our next step here is to start injecting that mod and see where we can get to with a bit of tinkering. And now to talk about the mods that we're going to be using. So there's 3 mods that we need to set up. The first one here is simple offline launcher without easy anti-cheat. So all that this mod does is disable our anti-cheat so that we can launch offline. So when our anti-cheat is missing, the game is just going to put us into an offline environment so you can play offline, do whatever you want without getting banned. The next one we have here is Elden Ring mod loader. It's just a way to organize the DLL files that we're going to be talking about in a second. And lastly is our Nightreign Unlocked FPS mod itself. So this mod is actually what's going to allow us to unlock our FPS. So while I'm not going to be going super in depth on what exactly you're doing here, basically you're going to follow instructions, install these different mods, load them into our game folder, disable anti-cheat, and load up. And after starting up, this is the screen that you want to see. This just shows you that you're not connecting to the internet, you're not connecting to the servers, you're playing offline. So what you're doing is not being identified by the game and can't possibly result in a ban. And we're going to be starting off here at 1080p now with our FPS actually unlocked. Now I should mention there is a limit to what you can set, or there is a limit that you can set, I should say. So here it's by default set to 120. However, just to see our performance here, I'm going to unlock this completely and just set something like 9,999 as our limit here so that we are not limited whatsoever. So starting off here, before we actually hop into a match, you can see we're still getting a rather consistent 200 FPS now here at 1080p. Some slight stutters that will pretty much wreck our 1% lows when those do occur, but they really quickly shoot back up. And if you've never played a Souls-like game, Elden Ring, or any Souls-like game really at these high FPSs, this is a really, really great experience. So let's hop in and see how this FPS kind of works out actually in a game. And you can see loading in, we are still getting really consistent frame times here with pretty flat frame time graph, really solid experience actually. So just about doubling, even a bit more, almost tripling our FPS at 1080p, coming from 60 all the way to a 150 average is certainly a really, really strong experience here. The other pretty surprising thing when we look at a game like this is for a game that is set at 60 FPS as a cap, there's actually not really very many, if at all, like broken animations or anything like that. The game really runs almost as though it was meant to have an unlocked frame rate. It still feels like incredibly responsive, incredibly fluid. You're still doing everything just like the same way you would. It just feels much, much smoother and much, much better. You know, oftentimes in games that are not meant to have an uncapped frame rate, you'll implement that frame rate unlock mod and you run into all these issues with terrible frame pacing, stuttering, you know, broken animations. But really here, it's essentially running perfectly here. And really, if you have a 9070 XT and you have a 1080p monitor and you want some more performance, as long as you are okay losing the default multiplayer option due to the fact that you are playing offline. However, I should mention it does support the seamless co-op mod, which for a lot of people, it doesn't have matchmaking the same way, that the default game does. But for a lot of people playing with friends, it is actually a better multiplayer experience. Anyways, I would highly recommend checking out this mod. I mean, getting a consistent 150 FPS average with 1% lows all the way up at 120 is certainly a really, really strong experience here at 1080p. All right, and we're going to bump up to 1440p now, still with that uncapped frame rate, of course. You can see right off the bat, we're still getting really great performance, not quite as high, of course, as we were at 1080p, but still an incredibly smooth experience, very, very consistent frame times, as well as completely respectable 1% low, down at about 107. So in my opinion, if you're playing this game solo and not queuing up with people anyways, there certainly, in my opinion, is not a great reason not to utilize this mod. As far as mods go on PC, a lot of people I think are afraid of mods. This one is incredibly easy. I essentially showed you the entire setup process, just dragging over some files, really doesn't take longer than like 2 minutes to set up, and we're playing Elden Ring at double the FPS we would have. Of course, the only wrinkle with something like Nightreign is it is, of course, a multiplayer title, so you're not getting exactly the same type of experience if you were to be playing online in a matchmaking lobby. But certainly, if you're just playing with friends, or if you're just, playing by yourself, I would highly recommend giving this a look. I do think it's worth the trouble. And our last setting we're going to test here, we're still at max settings, by the way, for all these tests, is we're going to be playing at 4K now, still our max settings. And you can see loading in here at 4K, while we are certainly getting higher than 60 FPS, we're not like wildly higher. It's not like a completely transformative experience. So if 4K was your primary resolution, you kind of just have to make the decision yourself. Is it worth getting an extra 20 or so FPS here with this mod enabled? In my opinion, at 4K, it may be slightly less worth it. I mean, the difference between 60 FPS and 80 FPS, you probably know if you're the type of person who can notice that difference. Me personally, while I can notice it, it's probably not worth the trouble of actually, enabling this mod to make sure that we are getting that extra FPS. But definitely to each their own. It does go to show the card can certainly perform better than 60 FPS. It's just not a huge improvement like we were seeing at 1080p, of course. But there definitely is the argument to be made for just, you have this performance anyways, so why leave it on the table? Which, I could see myself just going with that mindset, because you are getting a considerably smoother experience. Our 1% lows is another thing that is definitely improved, where we were getting around 55 on our 1% lows. Now we're getting 64. I guess in my opinion, it's really just comes down to how much do you, value being able to just play online without jumping through any hoops. If you'd rather just play the default experience online, probably not worth it here at 4K, but still pretty impressive just to see that, it can do 60 FPS and it can do more here. It's just not wildly more. Like, I did put out a YouTube short just to show, real briefly the experience on a 5090, and that is a much larger difference, getting like, if I remember correctly, around like 160 FPS at 4K. So that is certainly a more noticeable difference, but still, getting around 80, certainly you can feel it. And this game world, all the animations, everything feels even better. As good as it feels at a locked 60 FPS, feels even better at 80 FPS or 100 FPS or 150 FPS for sure. It all feels, much, much, much better. And when you're done playing, you can come in here and just delete all those files that you put in if you wanted to play without mods. Me personally, just because I am maybe a bit nervous, I normally just actually delete the entire game folder and then come to Steam and go to properties, installed files, and I just verify the integrity of the game files, which basically just re-downloads the game for you. So, in my opinion, better be safe than sorry. Just start from scratch if you want to do something like that. But that's been it. The Unlock the FPS mod on Elden Ring Nightreign. Definitely a pretty cool experience playing the game at a super high FPS. And if you want to use the seamless co-op mod, or if you're playing offline or single player anyways, I would highly recommend at least checking it out and just see if it's worth it. If you can get a higher FPS. In my opinion, I don't see a reason not to just check it out. All right, guys, that's been it. Going to be a short one today. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.